Hi, everybody. Good day. Welcome to today's Cathedral webinar. We are coming to you live on March 14th, 2025. Happy Pi Day for any math fans who are on the webinar. For those of you who don't know, our Cathedral webinars get their name from the Greek word for learning. And today you're going to be learning about understanding the Emergency Operations Center and navigating through crisis. And this is day 4 of the 4-part series. So this will be the conclusion. If you missed any of the days along the way, all of the recordings are posted here on the learning platform. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist here at the Native Learning Center. We're happy you could join us for today's webinar, especially on a Friday. If you could follow along while I read the disclaimer aloud. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. We also have our copyright infringement law pictured here. Just a friendly reminder that the webinar materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. As I said before, the recordings and all of the slides and any information from the past 3 days, as well as our other webinar courses, they are here on the learning platform in the courses section. And if you're new to the learning platform, know that now that you've registered, you're on here, you'll be on here, you're good to go for any future webinars. You would just log in and click on the green banner at the top of the screen, and that's how you'll join when an actual live webinar is happening. We do ask that when you join, if you can, to join with listen only, and that way we cut out any audio feedback. And if you join and you realize your audio isn't coming out of the right device, if you just come down to the bottom of your screen and you click on that blue phone icon, it'll bring up a list of your microphone devices and your speaker devices, and you can select the right one that you want to use. There are several ways you can interact during today's webinar. The main one is going to be that public chat. If you have any questions, any comments, especially any tech support issues, I can help you navigate through them. You'll just click on public chat and that'll pull it up just like you see here. You can click on this message box, type whatever you want to say, and then hit enter, or you can click on the little paper airplane button and that'll send it in as well. If you did join with your mic on, no problem. You can mute your mic down here. And then if you go to the shared notes section, there's a bunch of helpful links. I did include the presentation slides link in the chat box already, but I'm going to go ahead and put it in again just in case anyone missed it. Okay, and before I hand it over to Dr. Latchford, if y'all want to take a moment and just introduce yourselves in that public chat, you could let us know your name, where you're tuning in from, your work or your role in Indian country that's led you to today's webinar, and your tribal affiliation if you have one. And just a final note while y'all are getting the chat box going, if you click on the red menu panel that's all the way to the left side of your screen, know that it will immediately pull you out of the webinar and it'll take you to whatever you've selected. Don't worry if it happens. You'll just go back to that green banner at the top of the screen, click on it again, and you'll be right back in the webinar. All right, folks, it is with great pleasure that I introduce your webinar instructor for today, Dr. William Latchford, and I will hand it off to you now.
All right, thank you, Brooke. Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to the 4th webinar of the series of Emergency Operations Centers. The first webinar, we covered Emergency Operations Centers, just the core concepts. The second webinar, we covered the Emergency Operations Center activation and initial operations. Yesterday, in the third webinar, we covered the Sustained Emergency Operations Center operations with a twist of a multi-agency coordination. And today we're going to finalize with the Emergency Operations Center deactivation and transition to recovery phase. So this is all at high level to just kind of give you some nuggets on things to think about that could help you as you navigate emergencies and crises in your area with regards to an Emergency Operations Center. Thank you for being on this afternoon. A little bit about Native Peacekeeper Consultant Group. It's a certified woman-owned public safety consultant business. It's owned by Amy Osceola Latchford, who's a member of the Seminole Tribe of Florida and of the Otter Clan. The mission of the organization is to empower organizations by providing comprehensive and sustainable safety solutions and fostering community partnerships that enhance safety effectiveness with the tribal communities by applying our philosophy of our slogan, elevating public safety today for a safer tomorrow, specifically promoting Native American public safety. Amy's direction for the organization is just to give back and provide opportunities to enhance organizations from all the knowledge, skills, and ability that our consultants have garnered over their careers. So we have consultants that are scattered throughout the United States, to include a couple of consultants in Canada. They range from public safety officials and fire departments, emergency managements, local law enforcement or sheriff's office, tribal law enforcement agencies, Bureau of Indian Affairs, or the Federal Bureau of Investigations. So we have a full cadre of consultants that are prepared with their expertise to pass that knowledge, skill, and ability along to whoever we come in contact with. As Brooke said, my name is Will Latchford. I'm a 32-year public safety executive. I had the opportunity 32 years ago to go work for the Seminole Tribe of Florida as a boots on the ground police officer. And that opportunity allowed me to hone my skills when it comes to leadership, law enforcement, public safety, and retiring in April of 23 as the public safety director for the Seminole Tribe of Florida. I had the opportunity to be deployed throughout the country and familiarize myself on how different and unique Indian country is, and all the aspects and challenges that are in the environment when it comes to public safety issues and leadership issues. So I'm honored to be with you this afternoon. My education background is I have a bachelor's degree in public administration, a master's degree in criminal justice and emergency management, and my doctorate is in criminal justice, specifically on tribal law enforcement leadership when it comes to the relationships with the community that they serve. So I'm honored to be here with you this afternoon, and I hope for the next 90 minutes I can provide you some information that you can utilize as you progress through your emergency operations centers and your planning and any events that you may encounter. A little disclaimer from our organization. We just like to put this out there. It's the content presented in this training is designed to provide comprehensive, up-to-date information and guidance. In the event that any information or advice shared here appears to contradict your organization's policies and procedures, please defer to your organization's official guidelines and protocols. Your adherence to your internal policies and procedures is paramount for organizational and professional success. I shouldn't necessarily contradict anything that's in your policies. However, if I do, it's not intentional, and it's important to us at Native Peacekeeper Consultant Group that you go back to your organization, you follow that policy until you identify with your management team that policy needs to be changed or upgraded or deleted for the betterment of your organization. It's important to us that you're successful as an employee for your tribe, so we want to make sure that you promote your policies and procedures and you follow your policies and procedures. So if that contradiction does come up, please just refer back to your supervisors and have that discussion, and that's how we learn and become better in organizations. So this afternoon, like I indicated earlier, we're going to take a little bit deeper dive into the Emergency Operations Center, how to deactivate and transition into the recovery phase. The whole goal of deactivation is in the progression to become stronger and resilient, but get life back to a little normalcy, not just for the employee population, but the community you serve and anybody who's been impacted by that crisis that you're dealing with. So the whole mindset should be, when you're getting ready to deactivate, is that you want to progress into some sort of normal behavior so you can take yourself out of the crisis. You can take yourself out of that environment that's causing you the stress, and people can kind of get back to a little bit ease as they progress through their normal day. So when is the right time to shut down? When's the right time to start deactivating your emergency operations center? Well, some of the indicators that we look for is the incident stabilization. Is it contained? Does it continuously to pose a threat to the environment that you're in? Are there resources that still are needed within the environment to where you have to stay ramped up into a full activation, or can you modify and adjust to the incident based on the level of where the incident's at? We want to look at the resources sufficiency. We want to determine if the adequate resources are being utilized. Do we have enough resources for the event to start deactivating? So we want to look at that as an ongoing process. And of course, always with the EOC, regardless through the phase of the transition, you want to make sure that you're always a part of the de-escalation. So part of that de-escalation is, again, getting back to normalcy and transitioning to the recovery phase, where the agencies and programs are prepared to take back over and assume responsibility for their long-term projection and goal and direction. So when the event is over, an analysis is in need to make sure that you have the tools in place. So when you shut down the EOC and you start deactivating, that you're not shutting down too early. That's a big mistake sometimes that's made. The EOCs are closed sooner than the event or the support that is needed. And then it puts a lot of pressure back on the individual programs. So today we're going to go over some options that you may utilize and just put some framework and thought process into some of the areas that you can look at. During this de-escalation or this deactivation process, we always want to be strategic. So if you always keep in mind that as you navigate through this deactivation, you always want to look at a strategic approach. And that approach should always be slow and methodical. Temperature controlled or controlled tempo is really the prime when you deactivate a EOC. And the reason for that is because there's a lot of decisions that have to be made as you progress, because you do not want the deactivation to negatively impact the community or the population that you're serving. And by closing the emergency operation too soon, you could negatively impact the environment, which could create even more work, more stress, and possibly put more people in danger. So you want to look at this from a strategic approach. As you make your decisions, you want to be slow and methodical. And you always want to make sure you have a pulse on the status of the community and the environment that you're deactivating from. So as you deactivate, you want to look at a couple of things. You want to start assessing and evaluating the current conditions and the resources that are needed for overall. You want to partner and consult with all the stakeholders and your recovery partners. And that starts at the top from your political officials all the way down to the community. All those areas are important to just have those conversations with, to engage with, to get a feeling where they're at, to determine if there's anything that isn't being done that you need to do prior to getting back to normalcy. And then, of course, the authorization piece. If you're on the call and you're the leader that makes that final decision, then you need to look from top to bottom before you make that decision. If you're a middle manager or an upper manager that requires approval from your political officials, then gather all your facts, have all the assessments done, talk to all your stakeholders and your partners, make sure the community is comfortable with shutting down. It's not that you're getting their approval, you're getting their input because they're the ones living in the environment. So it's important to take an assessment of really how the community feels, where they feel they're at, what their needs are. And sometimes it's unrealistic, but they need to be heard. So by keeping the EOC open for a couple more days is not going to hurt. So just take those things into consideration. And before you ultimately start to de-escalate, you want to make sure you have that discussion with your political structure just to get their feedback, input. And if you need their approval, then you can obtain their approval from that aspect. But it's important that it's a team approach when it comes to the decision-making process. And as we talk in the webinar today. One of the things that I've learned over my career is just because the Emergency Operations Center closes, it transitions, and those responsibility transitions to the programs that are really impacted. And ironically, with Native Learning Center and the partnership they have with the tribal housing across the country, housing usually is the program that kind of gets stuck holding the ball in the bag and continues to work after a crisis happens. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we navigate today. So when we look at scaling down the operation, we want to take a phased approach. We want to, again, gradually reduce staffing levels and operational capacity. And that's important because a lot of times when you're living in crisis, everybody, it's not just one day, it's several days. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of anxiety going on, adversity going on, challenges happening, emotions are high. And once you start to de-escalate, everyone goes from 0 to 100 to give up because they think, all right, we're closing down. We can just stop what we're doing, go take a break, and then get back to normal. That's not how a de-escalation works. You got to do it in phases. You got to make sure the employees, and you have to communicate to the employees that the de-escalation is it's going to be a process. Don't just give up. Don't give up fast. They need to move at the space of the de-escalations going because they still have a responsibility and the expectation is on them from the community. So you want to make sure you have that discussion with your employees. Resource redistribution is very important. When a crisis happens, you bring all those resources together and it's all hands on deck and you use anything you can to get that crisis under control to mitigate those circumstances. Now, when you're de-escalating, you got to take that equipment and all those resources and put it back where you got it from, to make sure that everybody can start moving back to normalcy. Well, one area of going back to normalcy is that the crisis may still be happening. Just because you're de-escalating doesn't mean it's over. So now there's a shared component to where what resources do you keep in the crisis, and then what resources do you send back to the normal operations of your tribe or your program. And that's an important assessment that you have to do when it comes to resources and the redistribution, because you're going to have to keep some resources and equipment on scene or at the site or multiple sites. And then when it goes back to normalcy and programs and the majority of the employees go back to work, they're going to want to use all those resources because that's what they use every day before that crisis happens. So you as the EOC, you need to make sure you have a good pulse of what resources are out there, what are going to be needed as the operation starts to de-escalate. The third area is communication. Communication, of course, is the foundation of success for everything we do in life. When we look at communication and de-escalation of the Emergency Operations Center, same thing applies when it comes to communication and as the resource and redistribution of the equipment. Public safety, the housing folks that are ground level, they may have radios and radio channels they're using. You got to start looking at the fact is what is impacted from normalcy and what's going to be used for the event. A lot of times during an event, all the radios are consolidated to where the organizations are all talking on one radio or a couple channels they use, and then they use a common channel. Well, when you go back to normalcy and there's still a little bit of the operation left, you have to evaluate what radio system you're using, what communication levels you're using, because now you're looking at normalcy and the crisis still occurring until you're full de-escalated and your operation is 100% shut down. You're going to have two parallel environments working. So you want to make sure you evaluate your communication process to determine that each side from a normal operation of your tribe or your program, and then the crisis operation is run in parallel, and you have efficient communication when it comes to making sure that operation does not lose a beat, that your community is taken care of and no negative is going to impact the community. So communication is very important. That's something you want to make sure that you're keeping a good tab on to understand what's happening, because if you don't have good communication or good dialogue that's going on, the community is going to hear it, and then the ripple effect is going to come back, and then all the good work that you do and that your staff does is going to be negated, because the community is not going to be happy with the end result. So de-escalation is exactly that. Your de-escalation in phases, from the phase approach, resource redistribution, communication, and it's not over until everything as far as that crisis is shut down. So you want to make sure you have a finger on the pulse when you're scaling down operations. Now, when we transition to recovery, I view this as three different phases. One is the handover, transferring responsibilities to recovery agencies or programs, right? In hurricanes in Florida, what we would do is we'd transition over once we saw that de-escalation could occur with inside the EOC, and the EOC could scale back a little bit, depending on who was carrying the heavy load. If it was public safety, a lot of times, like I said earlier, it was housing. So what we would do is we would de-escalate the main EOC, and then we would end up having housing take control of the entire scene, and they would move everything back to their office. So they would kind of create a little EOC out of their office. And what that does, it gives them more control. It creates a little bit more of a streamlined process for the residents to talk to housing, because housing is something that is forever transient, right? So you have a lot of areas in housing that you deal with. So we would end up de-escalating the main EOC, and then housing would create a smaller EOC in their offices, because they're dealing with the long-term effects that we'll talk about here shortly. So housing, buildings and grounds, they would be coordinating together. So we would move the EOC, wouldn't be called an EOC anymore. It would just be the operation would be running out of housing in those circumstances. Or if it was a public safety event, we would move just the public safety people back to the public safety building, and everybody, all the other programs would go back to their office. Now, when you do that, you have to look at coordination. You have to make sure not everybody is shutting the door on it. They may be working back out of their offices that in the circumstances I talked about that don't work for housing. Maybe it's public works, or maybe it's education. You want to make sure that each program still has a foot on the field. They still have an interest in the game here to make sure that the community is taken care of. So coordination and communication is vital when you start to transition, because you don't want anything lost. You don't want anything hurting the community because you're shutting down too fast, or you're making decisions that aren't in the best interest of the community. So the Emergency Operations Center people still need to be engaged, regardless if the EOC is moved to a particular program. The emergency managers still have to take a vested interest to make sure the coordination is happening and the communication is happening between programs. Do not just push housing or any other program to the wolves, where now it's all on their shoulders and everybody just gives up. Still a team approach, still one tribe, still one community, and our job as employees is to make sure that that's taken care of. The other part is support. Again, every program needs to know they have a vested interest in the success of the overall operation, and they still have a responsibility to support and stay in the support mindset of the Emergency Operations Center as they transition back to normalcy. They may not be in the EOC, but the leaders of those programs still have to understand there's a responsibility they have to continue to support the other programs before everything is closed down. During this process of de-escalation, the documentation is very important. You want to make sure the documents are accurate, right? So when it comes to timesheets, gas logs, equipment usage, note taking, any notes that were taken, the scribe notes, the planning that was done. You want to make sure that all that information is put together nice and neat and it's complete. This is where you want to probably assign somebody to start evaluating the shortcomings in the documentation. You want somebody to start evaluating and reviewing to make sure all those documentations are complete. One of the things I ran into in my career is, sometimes when people are moving fast, they omit stuff on documentation. And ironically, it's usually that important stuff that you're going to need later on. So by assigning somebody to look at the documents, make sure they're accurate, make sure they're complete. And they have to have accessibility to these documents so they can look at them to make sure that, you know, the timesheets are filled out right. All the documents as far as the usage of the vehicles, the uses of gas, you know, the equipment, you know, all that paperwork means something. And what it means, it justifies all the work that you've done, and it provides opportunities for later on for your tribe to recoup financial equity from the federal government or the state government, so you can get reimbursed to become normal, right? You don't want your normal tribal budget to be hit over the event. So you want to make sure that you have all the documentation in place so it doesn't hinder or hold up any financial monies that the tribe is owed. My recommendation, what I did over the years, I assigned a couple people to just sit down in a room and go over all the documentation as the de-escalation started. So that way it can be fixed and corrected, and any information that needs to be added can be added at that moment before everybody kind of closes the door on the operation. So when you look at your documentation, it's very important that you assign somebody, you take it serious. It's a heavy lift. Not everybody wants to sit and just look at everybody's documents. And then when you start finding all the shortcomings that happen, you know, you got to go back, and there's a lot of follow-up. There's a lot of communication. You got to find the people, you have to find the equipment. So those errors impact the operation. So you want to make sure that documentation is looked at and it's finalized, and you use that during the de-escalation process. So when we look at the de-escalation, one of the areas is the after-action reports, and I'm not a big acronym guy, but I know it's known to in the field as the AARs for the people who like to use acronyms. You want to look at the planning phase. You want to define the objectives and scopes. You want to look at how you executed, conduct the reviews with stakeholders, and then reporting, developing, and disseminating the report to everybody. One of the areas that I always used is I would always ask the individual programs, before we did the big overall after action, I would ask the programs to go back and talk to their own people and develop their own program after action. You know, in fact, they need to see from start to finish, from the time that leadership was notified that an event was happening to the time of the de-escalation. They need to allow their employee base to go back and evaluate the events to create that information for the after action report is where we're going to learn. That's where we're going to learn how to become better. That's where we're going to sit around a room and we're going to look at each other and we're going to talk about the great things we did. We're going to talk about the not so great things that we did. We're going to talk about the things that we missed, right? We're also going to sit and we're going to talk about our relationships with other programs in a positive way, but we may identify some critical areas that have to be fixed. It's not about mudslinging or pointing the finger. It's about identifying areas in a critical manner that you can communicate, you can document down, that can help the overall after action report for the organization. Too many times people get in finger pointing situations, and that's not what an after action is. An after action is identifying areas that just need to be corrected or acknowledged, or even thought of that maybe somebody didn't think of, that can be used later on to strengthen the organization for the next time something happens. So after action is very important. You may want to think about allowing each program, if you're not already doing it, let them go back and identify the great things that they've done. Because I will tell you, regardless of what event is taking place, there's a lot of hard work that goes on from housing employees, public works employees. Tribes have people in programs that do a really good job. And sometimes that's overlooked because we want to see what we did wrong. We want to point fingers. The goal of an after action is not to point fingers. It's to identify areas that we can improve to make us more resilient, to make the program more resilient, to make the employees more resilient, give them an opportunity to grow and be challenged, and to provide that high level of service to the tribe. So you want to make sure that your after action, when you do it, that it's done the right way. because if you don't do it the right way, it could have the ripple effect where you're not being told the truth. And if you have an after action report that says everything was great, there's probably something wrong there with that organization if they're saying everything's great, because not every crisis is done perfect. There's a lot of things that are done the right way, but there also is a lot of things that we can always learn from every event because that challenges us. Through adversity, we get challenged, and those challenges provide opportunities for us to make the organization better. So that's an area that I can't express enough. Your after action report is just as important as the event itself. So now when we look at key elements of long-term recovery, this is a slide I'm going to spend some time on because I think it's important when we look at this tier, right? So you have resiliency, sustainability, equity, collaboration, and planning, right? So when we look at resiliency, strengthening the community networks is very important, right? We want to build in that long-term recovery, we want to build a robust social and organizational network that ensures residents have the support that they need to recover from a disaster or a crisis, and also prepare for future events. This network enhances that collective collaboration and capacity. We want to look through resiliency as far as infrastructure hardening. We want to prioritize our rebuilding of our infrastructure, regardless if it's governmental buildings or private homes, private residents, or the recreation facilities. And we want to look at resilient material. We want to look at how the structure was built and how can we improve by using better equipment when it comes to infrastructure hardening, better material. We want to look at to make sure that when we're fixing things, we may have to improve our building codes in the community. So we want to look at the building codes to make sure that they can withstand any hazard in the future when it comes to a seismic activity or extreme weather events. We want to make sure we take the time when we're thinking about resiliency to target harden and build up our infrastructure by utilizing those different aspects of changing the material that we use to build houses or buildings, and sitting down and really looking to see if our building codes are really working for us and not against us. The other part of resiliency is we want to create an adaptive system. We want to develop adaptive recovery strategies that minimize disruption and provide that flexibility and response to all the evolving needs. We want to focus on redundancy and essential services like transportation, utilities, communication systems, and we want to safeguard for future crises. So we want to look at, those key areas of transportation, utilities, communications. Those are things that will always be around. And through resiliency, we want to make sure we harden those areas and we keep them at the forefront. When we look at sustainability, there's a couple areas that's important. We have the environmental responsibility. We want to look at implementing environmental sustainable recovery practices such as, green construction, renewable energy, eco-friendly waste management systems. These measures reduce environmental impact. They promote long-term ecological balance for your community. We want to look at the economic stability. We want to support economic stability by focusing on job creation, business development, and diversify all the local industries. We want to make sure that we have the ability to have access to anything that we need that's going to make us stronger. We want to encourage the community to be invested into the process, to be invested and even look at opportunities that they may have that can help the community become better, to be a long-term economic partner, not only in strength, but also in health. And lastly is resource efficiency. We want to adopt practices that conserve resources. We want to continue to educate on sustained land use. We want to make sure we're planning right when it comes to our land use. And for example, hazard mitigation strategies like flooding resistance and resistance to some designs. We want to make sure that we're able to identify those areas that we can prevent opportunities that are going to be destructive to us, right? So we want to make sure we're able to plant trees in some areas if we have to. We want to make sure that when we plant those trees, the soil's not eroded. We want to make sure that we can identify those areas and bring those natural environmental issues to the forefront so we can have environmental security when it comes to the overall resource efficiency. When we look at the equity of long-term recovery, we want to channel recovery efforts towards the population that may not be at the level to take care of themselves, or they may not be at the level to really understand what to do, right? So we want to look at making sure that they have an equal playing field in your community. So you want to target those individuals in a positive way to be able to uplift them and support them. The senior center or the senior population is an area. A lot of seniors may not have that support. And so we want to make sure we target those seniors to make sure that they get the support that they need. The handicap, we want to make sure that the handicap stays safe. They get the support that they need. And this is something through the recovery or the de-escalation phase and recovery phase. You don't want to lose sight of these individuals or these areas because they need help just as much as everybody else does. They actually need more help and more support. So you want to make sure that you're proactive, you give them a voice, you allow them to participate, to understand what's happening in the recovery phase and the decision-making process, because they may have ideas that's going to help them. They're in a certain circumstance that they look at things a little different. And sometimes in an EOC, you're dealing with a crisis and you don't necessarily take the opportunity to look on how others see things. And the elder population and those populations that may not have the resources to deal with issues, just by talking to them, you may be able to get resources to them to address their issues, right? The other areas in equity, we want to look at the recovery process to address any pre-existing challenges, such as issues that you may have had in housing, those issues you have in housing for accessibility or healthcare availability. These are times where you can do strategic issues and strategic plannings to minimize the gap if your housing has shortcomings in it. During that long-term recovery, those are those things you can look at to make your housing programs better, your rental properties better. Start looking at what you can do to increase the investment and to create that foundation of your community to be stronger and grow post the event, post disaster. When we look at collaboration, it's important to strengthen those relationships that you have internally amongst tribal programs as you go through this long-term recovery and the de-escalation. You want to take a look at how your partnership worked. You want to look at all the documentation and those MOUs that you may have with the other programs or outside entities and see if they really worked, see if they were meaningful to your operation. And if they were, can you improve them even more? Or didn't they work and you want to look at redoing all of them? This is the time to do that when you're de-escalating and starting to have those thoughts. You want to involve the residents in your community. You want to provide the opportunity for them to have a voice. Send out surveys. Ask them how your program did in the community. Get on SurveyMonkey and Quatrix, the survey platforms, and send out surveys to everybody's email and asking them in the community to provide you that opportunity to tell you what you did good and maybe what you did not so good. Just remember, sometimes it's hard to hear the truth. We've all been in those positions, and that's really what you want. You want to hear the truth from people so you can make your program better and you can provide that better service to them. So you want to make sure you provide that opportunity to empower them, give them the voice. The other area is collaboration. Is you want to establish communication channels that may not have worked or may have failed during the process, right? So you want to look at those lessons learned when it comes to your preparedness, when it comes to communication, transparency, and collaboration. It only enhances the efficiency of your operation. So that's very important when you look at the collaboration piece. And finally, you want to look at the planning stage, right? Through the long-term recovery, you're always going to continuously plan as you progress through the de-escalation part. Comprehensive recovery plans, you want to take the opportunity to develop detailed, integrated recovery blueprints that includes specific goals, timelines. You want to create metrics that are tailored to each area in your housing organization. You want to create those same metrics and timelines and goals for your infrastructures that you have. You know, social service programs that you have in your community, you want to do the same thing. You want to take all these areas in planning and you want to create a game plan to determine what needs to be done in the recovery phase. Risk management strategies, risk management program is very important when it comes to de-escalation. You want them involved to conduct risk assessments to guide your mitigation measures in critical areas. They have the responsibility to prioritize actions that reduce potential damage for future disasters. They know your insurance policy. They know exactly what's in your insurance policy. So by knowing that and having them at the table, you're going to be able to create a dynamic risk management strategy that will help build up your community. It will help strengthen your codes, your building codes, and also it could mitigate other issues like flooding mitigation, or provide an opportunity for damaging weather to minimize any impact that it has on your community. So keep the risk management people right at the forefront. Give them the opportunity to be part of the recovery phase because your insurance is really going to be impacted with this, and risk managers, that's their profession, that's their technical expertise, and those are individuals that can really you can benefit from if you have them next to you. And lastly, you want to have an adaptive mindset, an adaptive framework. You want to utilize planning frameworks that are flexible and they can evolve and change when you look at something that is unexpected, right? You're going to develop some unexpected challenges as you go through the recovery phase. And this is important that we understand. We always stay adaptive so we can regularly review any of the issues that we have through the recovery strategies. We want to make sure we're always effective. And if we're always adapting, we're going to be effective. If you always have the open mind, it's going to provide that opportunity for us to be dynamic, to really move where we need to move to make sure the community is taken care of. So these areas, when it comes to long-term recovery phase, is really about the future, right? So when you're de-escalating the EOC and you're moving back to normalcy, you're starting to look at the future. You're starting to build that template to make sure that you are stronger, more resilient in the future. And resiliency, sustainability, equity, collaboration, and planning are the 5 areas that if you keep this template and you look at through your glass through these 5 areas, it will help you as you transition into the recovery phase. So in an EOC's role in supporting recovery, the emergency manager and your emergency management department doesn't stop, right? So it's very important that the emergency managers understand that they have to have a finger on the pulse. They have to support the other programs. If you're in housing and your emergency managers kind of step back a little bit from the operation, I recommend you call them and ask them to still stay engaged. They need to be part of the process. If FEMA comes in or any federal agencies come in, or even your insurance company comes in, it's important the emergency managers, they're going to be your liaison to FEMA. They're going to have all those resources that FEMA has, and they're going to need to be at the table. So it's important that emergency managers understand that through this transition and through this process, they stay engaged. The Emergency Operations Center, as I said earlier, may be closing or de-escalating down, but the operation can move to a specific program such as housing or social services. The Emergency Operations Center staff, which is traditionally the emergency managers, they have to stay engaged because it's important for the success of the community. They have too much knowledge that needs to be shared with you to make your organization successful. So keep them engaged. If they're not engaged, call them up and invite them over and express to them that you want them part of the continuous operation, because there's a lot of work that has to be done just because the EOC is closed. So you want to make sure that through your process, especially through a long-term process when you have a significant event, that your emergency managers are always engaged and continuously engaged all the way up until a couple years later when there's an audit that comes. They should be engaged through that entire process. That's their role. Maintaining community engagement. It's important that your community understands what you're doing. It's important for them to understand the good stuff that you did and the bad stuff that you did unintentionally, of course, and those areas that maybe you've identified you can do better in the future. So you want to make sure that you're communicating, you're honest with them, you're being transparent with them, involve them in the process, let them have a seat at the table to provide feedback to you, because eventually you're going to be providing services to them again. And by providing that service to them again, they're going to be able to provide you feedback that maybe can improve your service since they're your customer, right? It's not that the customer is always right, but the customer is always right to give us feedback so we can evaluate how we can improve our service. And again, you want to make sure that you're accessible to them. Just because the EOC is closed, make sure they have the phone numbers, the emails, they know who they can contact. We've all been in positions before where you call somebody and you get a recording, and the recording may not be as direct. You know, there may be a language barrier, and we may be on for 15 to 20 minutes. Even though the EOC is shut down, you don't want them to be sent to a recording. You still want them, the ones that are affected in the emergency, you want them to have easy access to people. So my recommendation is do not send the calls to a recording, have a live person there. So you're providing that high level of customer service to the people impacted. That's going to create an opportunity where you're not adding to their stress, and you're providing them the opportunity to give feedback and also talk to somebody to help solve their problems. When we look at promoting a community resilience, we want to empower them. We want to support the community, and we really want them to think whatever idea it is, that it's their idea, and we're supporting them because the initiative is really theirs. It's for them, and it's important to show the community that you're in a position that you want them to be empowered. We want to build capacity. Capacity building is important. We want to strengthen our resources. We want to strengthen our knowledge, skill, and ability. And through that process, we want to look at what we can do better for the next time. So we want to look at our training. We want to look at our education. We want to look at our employees to see how they responded and what we can do to make them a stronger workforce. And of course, adapting, prepare for future challenges and risk. You know, it's common that we want to be in our comfort zone. And when a crisis happens and then we de-escalate, people go right back to their comfort zone. If we can teach our employee population to be consistent and not so siloed off in their comfort zone and be open to change, improving all the time, and creating that environment where they learn to adapt to situations, it's going to be better overall for the community. So that's something you want to look at when you're promoting resiliency within your community. And you can do that from your programs. Your programs have a direct link to the community. So if you're promoting resiliency within your programs, that's going to filter out into the community that you serve. You want to look at the financial reconciliation of your tribe. This is just a high area slide. There are high level slide that your budget people need to be engaged. Although the EOC has been de-escalated, you want your budget people to start tracking and be meticulous at it. You want them to start their auditing process so they can provide you feedback of your program, right? At the end of the day, during this crisis, your budget or your existing budget is probably going to be impacted from a salary standpoint, from overtime, from an equipment standpoint, from your operational budget or line item budgets. So you want the budget office to start looking at, as soon as you're de-escalating, start looking at the impacts that the event had on your budgets. And this is important because we all have supervisors, right? So the housing director, you want to be able to go to council and say, listen, that event cost me $27,000 in salary. I spent another $12,000 in operational budget because I had to buy equipment. I had to rent equipment. I had vehicles go down, so I had to rent vehicles. You want them to understand that all the work that you did to take care of the community, there's a financial aspect to this, and it's going to have an impact on your annual operation budget. right? There are opportunities through FEMA and the federal government to get that money back, but you need to keep track of that the financial outlook, so you understand really how much a disaster costs. And so in the future, you may have to plan for disasters, and then you have a baseline you can work off of by looking at the financial reconciliation. So that's very important, that you get your budget people involved, have them start giving you the timeline, when you spent money, how much you spent money, how much overtime you're spending. That way you have an idea for the rest of the year, the rest of your fiscal year. FEMA's money may not come fast. Federal government's money may not come fast. So you may be over budget, if there's 4 or 5 months left in your budget. So you want to start looking at that so you're not caught off guard, and you can make sure your employees are paid. You talk to your political officials so they can adjust their budget so your budget has funds in it so you can make it through the rest of the year. Same thing with equipment. You want to start looking at, when you're de-escalating the equipment returns, you want to see where your inventory is. You want to see what equipment that you rented from companies that may be able to help you through that crisis, right? So you may have rented water pumps to pump the water from the roads. You may have loaned some equipment out to another program. You want to make sure all this is documented and you're inspecting all the equipment to see if there's any damage or wear and tear. A lot of times what happens is people don't realize they use this in a crisis and it's overused. It's not meant to be used in a crisis. So it's getting the wear and tear. And then once the crisis is over, you put it back in service and then it breaks down and you're wondering how come it broke down. Well, the wear and tear and the usage it used during the crisis, it was used maybe in a manner that it shouldn't have been used. So you want to make sure that you're doing inspections, your inventory, everything. And this is part of that financial piece too, because you may have a piece of equipment that breaks down or even a vehicle that breaks down. And in order for you to do your job on a normal basis, you need that piece of equipment or that vehicle. You can use that financial audit that you're getting from the finance people, your budget people, and then you use your equipment and your inventory data and you bring that into your bosses, and that's your justification, the reason why you need to buy a new vehicle or you need to buy a new equipment, because in order for you to do your job on an every normal day basis has been impacted from the crisis, and you might not be able to do it. So in order for that, you have your justification at your fingertips. So this is all a strategic approach when you're de-escalating your EOC when it comes to finances and the equipment and inventory. It's so important to follow this structure, and that way you're not living in crisis after the crisis, right? It's a lot of work, but if you plan this out, when you need new equipment, finance is going to be there. Your political officials are going to see the picture. The decision makers are going to see the picture to help you and assist you get your job done on behalf of the community. We talked a little bit about staff debrief. It's important that as a leader, you sit down with your staff and just sit around. You can sit around the coffee pot or the water cooler and just sit around and just see how they're doing. It's not normal for people to live in crisis. And regardless if you're in public safety or if you work for housing, if you're an electrician or you're a social service person, everybody deals with crisis differently. So it's important that you sit down with your staff. You allow them to voice their concerns. You allow them to have the opportunity to share the experiences they went through. Sometimes you'll hear some great stories. You'll hear some emotional stories from staff when they're out there working in the community that you won't necessarily hear in the EOC. When you're in the EOC, it's kind of you're dealing with the crisis. So there's a lot of good things that happen out there when you have a crisis. The employees do a great job and they come across some things that are emotional. Sometimes you need to give them that opportunity just to let that out. And by sitting around, just having normal conversations in a non-threatening way, no titles, no one has any titles on their shirts or name tags. You're just sitting around. You're all good human beings that take care of the community, and you're just sharing your experiences. That's important. It's healthy. It provides wellness to the employees. And what it also does, if you're a leader and you're sitting in that room, it shows you care. It shows your employees that you care, that you want to recognize them, and you appreciate what they're contributing to the organization and to the community. And you can be proud as a leader because you're going to see the dynamics and the people that work for you and the great work that they do. And they're doing that work to the community, and they're doing it through you as the leader. So you want to give them the opportunity. You want to make sure that you're supporting them and allow them to debrief from a mental health scenario. Just give them that time. You may sit and shed a tear with them. You all may sit in a room and cry, and that's really, really healthy. That's an opportunity for everybody to recognize the hard work that you did, but also recognizes crisis is emotional. It hits us. It hits us sometimes in the heart. And we want to make sure that the employees understand they have a great support system in the tribe and the program they work for. When we look at the legal and regulatory compliance, this is important when it comes to the attorneys and your legal advisors. You want to make sure that they're starting their review. They should be looking at all the mutual aids that are in place. Do they have to be updated? Do they have to be changed? Do new mutual aids have to start and start the progress to get them in place before the next disaster comes? They're going to look at your FEMA paperwork. They're going to look at the MOUs that you have with FEMA, grants. You have, this is the time really where the attorneys really need to engage to start looking at the paperwork, to start looking at the opportunity that's going to benefit you in the program. So you want them to look at the documentation. You want to make sure that they have and they're maintaining the records to ensure compliance for future audits. And you want to talk to them about the things that you guys did good, the things you didn't do so good. And by doing this, you're providing them the opportunity so they can see the picture, so they can make sure in long term, when it comes to regulatory and legal issues, that you're protected. So it's important to have the attorneys at the table. They can identify areas that you may not be thinking of, and it gives them the opportunity to start looking at the organization as a whole to make sure your sovereignty is protected and you have all the documentation, the MOUs, and all the contracts in place to make sure that your community and your tribe is successful. Contracts are, they go through a process on a normal day basis. And so you want your attorneys to look at the crisis because you probably purchased some stuff that are outside your normal everyday policy. And you want to make sure the attorneys look at that to make sure there was no violation of laws or even tribal policy. So, and if there was, you want to make sure there was justification for that. When you look at data preservation, you want to make sure your IT people are ensuring that the critical infrastructure of your data is protected. You want to make sure that they're going in to make sure there's no viruses or hacks that happen during that time, because you may need all that data from emails to web EOC. If you use that, any application that you use, you may need to bring all that back out in not 1 year or 2 years, maybe 3 or 4 years when you get audited for the grants or the money that you take from other entities or the federal government. So you want to make sure your IT people are looking to back up whatever the event was, have them stored on another backup drive, so that way you have redundancy to protect yourself. You want to make sure your archives within all your policies, and this is the time to review your policies to see if any IT policies or archive or data policies need to be implemented to ensure that you have the data preservation to protect you as the program, per tribe overall, and to protect the community if there's any issues later on in any audits. Talked a little bit about it earlier about community feedback. The community has a lot of information, and they're going through the crisis, and as they're going through the crisis, their emotions are rising. And as you're doing the de-escalations, it's important to recognize the community is also de-escalating from their process. And part of the job that you can do to help the community de-escalate, and this will create support for you, is start engaging with them more. Like I indicated earlier, you can use SurveyMonkey or Quatrix, send out surveys to them, make individual phone calls to them, have your staff do follow-up calls or even home visits to them, and just sit down and do the same thing as you did with your staff. allow them the opportunity to have input, allow them the opportunity to provide you feedback, and they can do it through multiple fashions. They can do it through surveys, hold community or town meetings. You can do a barbecue. If you're in housing, I know that there's several housing programs across the country that do, block parties. Once you're de-escalating, you can bring the community together, talk about the crisis, allow that time to kind of filter out, give them the opportunity to de-escalate as well. Not everybody, again, as employees, know how to address and deal with a crisis. Same thing with the community. The community goes through the crisis. They deserve the opportunity to de-escalate as well. So you as a program want to provide that opportunity, and you can do that by twofold, by helping them process through the de-escalation, and at the same point, you're going to get feedback from them to determine what you can do better to serve them in any future crisis. You want to look at lessons learned. You want to see how you're going to put those lessons learned into action, right? So you want to identify those lessons learned from your response. You want to analyze those lessons in those areas that you can be improved. And then you want to look at how are you going to implement them in the future, right? So when you're de-escalating, these are all areas that you're looking at. And then you create yourself a timeline on how you're going to implement those things that you've identified and when they're going to be implemented, right? You don't want to go information overload when it comes to implementing change, right? Remember, I've indicated earlier is that individuals sometimes are resistant to change. We like to be in our comfort zone. So regardless of what you've learned, you also have to have a strategic course on how you're going to implement and respond to future disasters. And how you do that is just as important as what you identified as what you need to learn. So just understand, again, a slow, methodical, strategic approach when you go through lessons learned and how to put them into effect to better your program. So when we look at resource transition and planning, we want to look at also the surrounding areas that we're in. We want to make sure that when we're de-escalating, that we're communicating that with our partners. If it's outside the tribe or the surrounding area, you want to let them know what you're doing. You want to ensure that you're not de-escalating too shortly or too quick, because by de-escalating too quick, they may have an issue that may come back into your jurisdiction or your area. So you want to communicate that. This is where it's important for multi-agency collaboration and make sure that structure and that communication path is in play, because you want to know when they're de-escalating and they want to know when you're de-escalating. That way it's a smooth transition that doesn't negatively impact the community. So it may be something you want to look at, is to have that transition period for your surrounding areas. And before you de-escalate, you have that discussion with them and see what they're doing, and vice versa. Ask them to call you if they're going to de-escalate. If you didn't call them first and they're going to de-escalate first, let them call you so you understand where they're at, because you can learn things from them prior to you de-escalating. We talked yesterday about volunteers. Volunteer management is so crucial throughout the entire process. But just like your employees in the community, volunteers deserve an opportunity to be recognized for the work that they're doing. They deserve the opportunity to de-escalate from the crisis, and they deserve the opportunity to hear from you as a leader or their supervisor what they did good, maybe what they didn't do so good, and what they can do better in the future. It also gives the opportunity for them to tell you maybe training that they need, that you can sit and you can look forecast on that training opportunities that they need. The other piece which is important is the wellness of your volunteers. Again, you want them to be able to sit around and have that environment where they can sit around and have just that candid conversation. If they need to cry, excuse me, if they need to just, have a hug because of what they went through. Crises are not normal. And when people go through crises, they need to be able to facilitate their feelings. They need to be able to get out their emotions. and you as the boss have that opportunity to do that. So volunteer management is very important. And when you do your after action report, you want to make sure that you have a place in there where you're focusing on volunteers to provide them the opportunity to voice their opinion and concern. You also can provide surveys to your volunteers and your employees. So surveys are really good. You don't want to be too impersonable with surveys, but you can use them at a certain level to get surveys out. Public communication strategy is important. Again, how is that information you're communicating when you're de-escalating? When are you going to let the community know? Does the community, are they engaged in the process of what you're doing when you're doing the de-escalation? So you want to provide regular updates to the public, however your channels are for communication. You want to do it more than one way, and you want to be consistent on that information. You also want to be very open. So when you're de-escalating, and if you start hearing community grumbling, you want to make sure that you stop and you evaluate the situation, because the community could see something that you're not aware of. So you want to make sure you don't de-escalate too quick. So you want to make sure that your communication out to the public is a two-way street. You communicate out to your community, provide them the direction, and also you want to provide that opportunity for them to voice their concerns or prompt any questions that your de-escalation may be causing. So you want to make sure you recognize that and you're open to that piece. I talked about it earlier. I won't spend too much time on this slide. You want to look at the psychological effect of your employees. Some areas that you can connect with them is you can listen. Just be a good listener. Sometimes you don't have to say anything. You can just listen and let them speak and let them get out their emotions because it affects everybody differently. You want to protect them as well, right? So you don't want to put them in harm's way if they're dealing with this and it's overbearing for them. You don't want to send them out to the public to where that emotion is transferred out into the public. So sometimes you have to take employees, and after you de-escalated, you may have to give them a day off or keep them in an office away from everybody, just so they can control themselves in a manner where their emotions aren't getting the better of them. They may be too emotional where they're upset because the crisis created some trauma for them. So you want to make sure you protect them as leaders and managers of programs. And the other part is you want to connect with every one of your employees. So regardless of how big your organization is, I know sometimes you have a vast majority of employees, but as a leader or a housing director, make sure that you go out and you talk to all your employees, have those small conversations, let them know that you care, let them know that you're part of their support system, and they will open up to you. Maybe not the first time they see you, but they'll give you that opportunity once they know the environment is safe for them to talk, it's safe for them to let out their emotions. Then they'll let it out and you'll be able to work with that. You'll be able to have that opportunity to help them navigate through that crisis. Economic development recovery initiatives. There's three areas that I look at. Assessment. You want to look at your economic impact of the disaster. How much did it cost? What was that crisis, and how much did it damage your housing rentals, right? Or your townhouses, your apartments, or your houses themselves. What's that initial assessment? You're going to need that for insurance. You're going to need that for FEMA. So you want to make sure that you're thinking of those areas from a community standpoint of what that damage is going to be. You want to start looking at planning, right? So if you have townhouses that were impacted or apartments that were impacted and there's severe damage, maybe you don't want to rebuild apartments. So you want to start planning. Maybe you want to put houses there, right? Maybe you want to look at putting a different structure than the way apartments are set up. You may want townhouses that are structured differently. So you want to start looking at, when it comes to the economic recovery initiative, looking at the planning and the planning phase for that. And then implementing. How are you going to do that? What's the timeline you're going to do that? What direction are you going to go? How many years is it going to take? And when do you want to start that? When do you want to start your planning for that so you can get your townhouses, you get the architect in, you can get that foundation of approval from your tribal council. You want to start looking at that implementation phase, start drawing that out on your de-escalation. These are all things where, again, the crisis may stop, but you're still in the crisis. you're still in that manner as a leader and somebody over housing, where you still have a responsibility, because the world doesn't stop, the community doesn't stop, and we've all been in positions as leadership to where, you know, the crisis has stopped, but that expectation that you're asked to do every day is still there, and that doesn't slow down. So you're moving from the crisis to the continued high expectations that your community is asking for you and demands of you. When we look at the infrastructure overall, we want to look at the water, the power, and the roads, right? You want to make sure you talk to your public works people, make sure after the crisis is done, just have them do an assessment and a test of the water quality. Make sure your water the pipes weren't impacted. That's where public works comes in. You want to make sure that they're doing the water quality testing to make sure it's safe for the community to drink the water. If they need a boil water notice for a couple days, you know, you want these things identified, and that's where public works comes in. You want to look at the power. Is your whole community back on shore power, or are they working on generator, right? So you want to start asking those questions when it comes to the de-escalation of the EOC. These are things you want to know. You want to know that they're in progress. There was an opportunity where the tribe in Florida that I used to work for, you know, a hurricane hit 3 different reservations. So we had the EOC open, and we had incident command at the other locations. 2 of the locations we were able to dial back the incident commands, but the 3rd reservation we had to leave the incident command there because they didn't have power. Everybody else got power. The 3rd reservation didn't have power, and the power company told us it was going to be 3 to 4 weeks. So we left the EOC open for those 3 to 4 weeks just for that one location, because we knew they didn't have power. They had generators there. We had a plan for having propane brought out to some of the generators. We had a plan for diesel to be brought out for some generators. And then we had to make sure that we had the infrastructure built out, because generators aren't meant to run for a long time like that. So they had to come out and get service. So we had to create a dynamic schedule with private entities to come out and service the generators. And through that process, when you shut a generator down, that's where the homeowner is going to not have power, as we know, and their food may get spoiled depending on how long the generator's down. So we had to mitigate all those issues. So infrastructure restoration is very important. You want to make sure that you're looking at the water, the power, and then when we look at the roads, are they passable? Are they flooded? Again, public works or your roads people should go out there. You want to make sure that there's a plan in place if roads are not passable, that you have an MIT plan that could tell the community exactly where they need to go to continue to stay safe. Environmental remedies is important. It's important for us to look at the environmental aspect of this process when we look at de-escalation and the de-escalation of the EOC. We want to make sure we assess the environment, any planning we need to do, and then remedies that we need to put in place. And it's all about making sure that the communities do not have any hazards that are in the environment, right? So we want to make sure the environmental area is looked at as we progress through the de-escalation process. One of the things that I've learned over my career and these crises that we've dealt with in Florida is usually housing is the program that gets stuck with 99% of the time, is usually working longer and harder than any other program. Other programs work really hard, but because of housing, you have temporary housing, you have transitional housing and permanent housing on an everyday basis. When a crisis happens and housing is impacted, that escalates, and that brings it into a higher area of what do we do? How do we handle it from a housing aspect? And we dealt with that with Florida with hurricanes. Tornadoes would come through and impact houses where people were no longer allowed to live in their houses. The housing program is trying to figure out, okay, where do we put them? Where do we get houses from? You know, can we get temporary trailers brought in? Do we have other houses on the reservation, which is typically not normal, right? So there's no houses that are just sitting there waiting for people to move in. So we understand that after this crisis hits, housing is a very important piece to the success in getting the community back to normalcy. The Emergency Operations Center needs to take a proactive approach to help housing and assist housing. And the way we do that is you can assign liaisons from every program that is to work with housing. So housing, one, has the support. They don't feel like they're on an island of their own. And as they progress through transition and helping the community, you still have all hands on deck to help housing with their operations. So, it's not easy dealing in situations when you have housing shortcomings. You can't just put people up in hotels. During a crisis, usually the hotels fill up. So areas are definitely impacted to where space is limited. So part of the EOC's responsibility is to make sure during de-escalation that housing is always supported. And you may have to take employees from other programs, assign them into housing, even if it's just for scribes, filing or taking notes. Give them the support that they need. For the emergency managers that are on the call or on this WebEx, give housing the support that they need as they go through this process. Because again, most of the time, they're the organization or the program within the tribe that has a longer term when it comes to dealing with crisis. So the EOC may be shut down, but the community really depends on housing. It's an important infrastructure, and it's important that they get the support they need to be successful. I mentioned it earlier, data sharing agreements. Again, we want to evaluate our partners. We want to look at the scope of the agreements, and we want to make sure that the agreements are protected and they're private. There's some information that are in agreements that are proprietary to the tribe. We want to make sure that those agreements are not out in public, that it's protected by the tribe. So these are the times you want to look and see to make sure, however your process was, what you did with those agreements, and were they used properly and effectively. So review the work that was done on the agreements and change whatever needs to be changed to help you facilitate into the next disaster. For this slide, it's important. I kept it very vague because each one of the tribes and programs, it's important to have a deactivation checklist, and only for your program really what you're dealing with, right? And this should be part of your all hazard plan, but I put on there personnel and equipment were probably the two most important pieces, but this is not the end of the list. This is just the start of a list. But create yourself a checklist throughout the year. Sit down and keep that checklist close to you so you can always evaluate what's on that checklist and add stuff to it. And before you know it, you'll have a checklist that's 2 pages long, and that will help you as you transition away from the EOC into normalcy. This will help you work smarter, not harder. And that's the goal, right? We don't want to work harder. We want to work smarter. So create yourself a checklist on really what your responsibilities are, what you're supposed to look at, and if you ask your managers to create a checklist in their areas, so that way if people are using the checklist as a guide, right? They shouldn't get tunnel vision on a checklist. A checklist is there as a guide to remind you what your responsibilities are, and then you build off of that checklist. So checklists are important. I highly recommend not just the top leader having a checklist. Every leader should have a checklist, and that will articulate. It also paints a picture to make sure nothing is left behind. So if we can create good checklists, then it gives us that framework we can work off of to build a good core program. So when we de-escalate an EOC, we transition back to normal, we have the opportunity to use some sort of structure that's going to remind us to provide that service to the community. It's going to remind us those tasks that we have to do to get back to normal, but to protect the tribe. Some of the key takeaways, we talked about preparedness over the last 4 days. The emergency operation plan has to be in place before the crisis happens. So the EOC needs to make sure that plan is in place and everybody is aware of it. All the tribal programs are aware of it. All the employees are aware of it. We want to make sure that preparedness is key and get it done prior to the crisis. Coordination is important when we look at de-escalation. Again, this is something you want everybody to know the plan. You want everybody to know what their coordination routes are going to be. And it's important through the recovery phase for the community that the coordination is developed, that framework is developed beforehand. We do not want to wait till the last minute for any coordination aspects. And lastly, we want to support the community resilience and long-term recovery for the just the sole fact of making the community stronger, right? And that's what we're there for. We want to make sure that the community is stronger. It's put in place for the purposes of us becoming more resilient. It gives us that opportunity to always provide that high level of service to the community we serve. So we want to always make sure ask ourselves the question is, how resilient are we? And how much more resilient can we be? And if you start looking and being honest with yourself, you always can build on what we did today. You can do it better tomorrow. What you do tomorrow, you can always do it better the following day. What's MIT stand for? Yes, it has to do with basically your traffic control. It's method of your traffic. So if somebody creates a plan, I apologize to use the acronym, and I should have explained it out. What it is, it's the method for your traffic control. So if a road's closed down, somebody creates that plan to redirect traffic and send the traffic in a certain direction. And that plan is really what they call the MIT plan. Is they just give that plan out, disperse that plan out to who needs it, so everybody's aware that the traffic is being diverted. I think I skipped the slide here. Let me make sure. All right, so just to review your next steps, a couple of the things that I highly recommend after these 4 days of webinars. Go back to your overall all hazard plan and your EOC plans, and take a fine-tooth comb through them. Look at it very objectively, and these are things you should do every quarter anyway. Look at your EOC plans, so that way you're not just doing it after a crisis. You want to take that opportunity to update your plans. Look at lessons learned. Again, as we talked yesterday, look at lessons learned for that other people go through, so you don't necessarily have to go through the crisis like they did. You can steal their lessons that they've learned through those after action reports, and then training on your plans. That is the most important piece. Please make sure you train on your plan and that you have the opportunity to put the employees to the test so they can make the mistakes without the crisis happening. So you want to make sure you train on those plans, and the employees have the opportunity to learn those plans and practice till they become permanent. Not practice till perfect, practice until they become permanent, and give the employees the opportunity to go through that phase for the purposes of they're human. They're providing the opportunity to serve the community. And by doing the training, doing those tabletop exercises, you're giving them the opportunity to raise their level of knowledge, skill, and ability to take care of your community. Regardless of what their role is, everybody needs that training. Everybody needs the opportunity to do things better. And by providing that training to them, doing after action reports, and then taking that after action report and putting it into an exercise, they're really going to learn from their mistakes. They're going to take what they already know and they're going to build off of that. And you're really going to develop a high level employee that does great for your community. And I'll pause there for any other questions. All right, thank you. And MIT, I'm talking about MIT. It's method of transportation is really what the acronym is, but method of transportation is really what that means. All right, hearing no questions, thank you for that feedback. This is our contact information. Please feel free to email us or contact us if you have any questions. We're always available to you. And on behalf of Nader Peacekeeper Consulting Group, I thank you for taking the time to watch this webinar and be part of the 4-day webinar. I know sometimes the information can be dry, but we appreciate your service to the tribe that you are employed by and you're a member of. And I wish you all nothing but safe and a healthy and happy weekend and the rest of 2025. And thank you for being part of this series. Brooke, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks so much for the incredible closing of this webinar series, Dr. Latchford. All of you who spent your Friday afternoon with us, you guys are incredible. I did put the link for today's webinar feedback survey in the chat. If y'all could just take a minute to complete that for us, helps us know what's working, what we can improve upon, and that feedback is shared with Dr. Latchford as well. Our next webinar is going to be next week on the 20th. This is going to be on Grant Professionals Are Superheroes. Your instructor will be Diane Leonard, who's the president of the D.H. Leonard Consulting and Grant Writing Services, LLC. You can access this as well as our other recorded webinars on our YouTube channel now. There is a whole playlist called the Cathedra Webinar Archive. The link for that is in the shared notes, and I'm going to put that into the chat for you as well. We encourage you to share them with your friends, share them with your colleagues. There's a lot of really great information on there. And if you missed any of day 1, 2, or 3 along the way, all of those recordings are within that archive, and they're also posted here on the learning platform in the courses section. We hope you can check out our upcoming training events. We post about them on our various social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. If you are a podcast fan, we have our in-house produced podcast, the Hopathanga Native American podcast. You can listen to that wherever you listen to your podcasts, or if you like to watch the interviews with our special guests, we have a whole playlist of that on our YouTube channel as well. But otherwise, want to wish everybody a fantastic rest of your Friday. Have an amazing weekend. If there's any math enthusiasts in here, have a happy Pi Day. And thanks again for spending your Friday afternoon with us. We appreciate you. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording.
Brooke, before you turn that off, let me just correct something. I said MIT, it's actually MOT. I wrote the wrong acronym down, so I apologize for that. It's maintenance of traffic. It's called MOT. It's an MOT plan. And that's the maintenance of traffic, and it's basically what you need to do when the road closures are diverted. And I apologize for the mix-up.
All right, and that made it in, no worries. I'll stop the recording now. Thanks everybody for your engagement today.